So good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for coming. And I'm sure, like all of us, some of us saw the film, of course, before being on this panel, but again, we were touched incredibly. And Arthur, I must say, we must thank you for an absolutely extraordinary film.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Arthur, and I think I can say it's more than a film, it's an experience. And it's an experience of learning to understand something. And I think some of the things you yourself said in the film are very, very important, and perhaps you can share more of that with us. Two things that particularly remained with me were, of course, what you said at the end, that this is something we have been through together, we have survived, and the issue is really meaning, the meaning of life and how we share life and how we respect life. And the other thing related it's related to that is also when you said in the film, this is a disease that actually questioned everything that we feel as, you said, Africans, that we communicate with each other, that we touch each other, that, and here is a disease that takes all of that away from us. And the response to the disease strengthens that even more, and that's why the understanding of the community is so difficult if everything you stand for emotionally and socially is actually destroyed. So how was it for you when you started making this film, when I guess that experience was reinforced? Can you share a little bit with us how the film came about, how you identified the people, these extraordinary people that you have shared with us, and how the film changed you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for making it possible to be here today. My involvement with the outbreak itself started one morning. I found out that the information coming from the government concerning the outbreak itself has some issues, and the major issue was that it lacks hope. You understand? The information was Ebola kills. If you contact it, you die. So that was what led people to run into the bush, to secure themselves in other ways. Because if the medical sector that should have the ability to cure or treat me cannot do it, then nevertheless, I have to run away. So that information led to people running all over the country. And so the disease quickly spread from Kailan at the east to places like Cambia, way at the north, And so I went to work the next day morning, and I called everybody around me. I said, we have to do something. And so we quickly got information on the outbreak back in Congo, and then got some information from some doctors in the US, and we built a short film that we called What You Should Know About Ebola. So which actually gives the basic information as to how you contact the disease and how you can secure yourself and all of that, And then that went out, and it makes a huge difference. And at the end of the day, I started working with, I was contracted to shoot with Tangle Banks, an American organization, to follow some doctors. And I found out that what was actually happening on the ground was not what the media was saying. The media is one key factor that triggered me on this particular film, because it's about my identity. It's about what makes me who I am. It's about me as a black man, not only a black man, but a black African. And having the media using words like ignorant, was for me very, very degrading. If you say ignorance people were like running into the bush, all of that was so degrading. And when I went to the places where people have been infected, you find out that the first respondents were the community. If you're sick in Africa, in Sierra Leone, if you're sick, you don't just go to the hospital. Many of us don't go to the hospital. The first people that comes to you is either your family. If you have no family, it's your neighbor or the nurse in the community. And so when I went out and I saw these things and I realized that the media has not been doing justice to the story. I could remember I picked up my phone and I called my friend in America Bank and I said to him, you know what, I want to do a story. I have to cover this story. If I don't cover this story, then we're going to lose an important aspect of our history. If we don't tell the world what's happening, how it's happening, if they don't get it from our own point of view, then they're going to get it from a third-party point of view. And then we're going to be seen as, lazy and backward people, just folding our hands, waiting for the world to come to our rescue. So that was how we get into working with Ebola. And we did some PSAs, public service announcements, and short films that actually changed the game. What you should know about Ebola was one, and another was Hassan. All right. When we started filming, we started with the title of Survivors as a working title. But then I could remember one night I was thinking and I said, survivors cannot be limited to only people who are infected. We all survived, because I thought of what's happened to me sometimes when I go out into the field to shoot. I went to Kenema sometime to shoot, coming down to Moyamba, and the whole community, an entire community was quarantined, and I was filming. And I could remember that I was sweating so much that I wanted to wipe the sweat off my face, and I was afraid to use my own hand to wipe the sweat off my own face. And the reason was I was thinking if I had touched somebody or if something had happened that got the virus on my gloves, And that was how the story, the title stuck. And I said, you know what, this is something we all survived. And it has to be about us. It has to be about us as Sierra Leoneans. And in terms of our characters, we got Mohammed from the Ministry of Health. He's the first volunteer ambulance driver, because when it started, there were no ambulances. So to drive the 4x4 vehicles that were around, people refused to volunteer. Then Mohammed came up. And when he came up with 7 others. But out of those 6 others, so out of 7 of them, he's the only one who survived. You see, so, and Mohammed was like, Mohammed has always been friendly. He's friendly and he's open up. And the kind of access he gave us to his life, his home and everything was superb, And then I got the kids on the street, Fode. I had been filming with Fode before then, because my work, I am a pastor and I'm also a filmmaker. So I have been working all my life in communities, And so I've been filming with Fode before then. But the reason why Fode made it to this story was because through Fode we were able to see deep into the communities. We were able to understand the risk that ordinary Sierra Leoneans were going through. We filmed with something like 28 to 30 different people. In the first leg of the filming, we filmed for about 8 months complete, every day filming with different set of people. And Margaret is a unique story, because Margaret has been coming to the center and helping in acting, in developing the PSAs that we put out. And one day I could remember I asked Margaret to tell me to recite the nurses' pledge, because I had wanted to do a short film to encourage nurses. And then she recited this pledge, and that was it. I was like working on my script for about 2 weeks, didn't see Margaret. And we were trying to identify a center that we will shoot. So that was how we had access after contacting guys in the US, because the government would not allow us to film in the center. And that was like some of the things that actually beat me down. the BBC and CNN and Al Jazeera's that are putting out stories that are not correct, you allow them to film in those centers. But we as Sierra Leoneans, we are not allowed to film. So I was like so angry. But then we finally got through to emergency, and I want to say thank you to them, to film in their center. And we went to film at emergency. I personally went to start the filming there, and I met Margaret. And I was like, what are you doing here? And she was like, you know, you remember the day you asked me to recite the nurse's pledge? And I said, yes. She says, well, that's why I'm here. Because after reciting that pledge, I realized that if as a nurse, because she was afraid to work, because the entire medical sector was stigmatized. A nurse is referred to as Ebola nurse. A doctor is referred to as Ebola doctor. And some of them are driven away from their houses, from their homes. You understand me? And if she had worked, she was living with her family. If she had worked, then the family would have drove her out. But at the end of the day, she decided to work and told them that she was coming to We Own TV. That's our own center. And so when I met her there, I decided to film with her because I wanted to know what would happen if a family finds out. But as God willing, the family never found out until everything ends. You know, so that was how I got to Mohammed. And finally, for my wife and family, well, we decided that we would film with everybody. But one day, in looking at the story we actually wanted to tell, I was like, we do not have access to the community clinics, that we are the only clinics open. All other hospitals were closed. Government closed all of them. Only community clinics and the two big government hospitals in Freetown, Connaught and Cottage. And so I looked at my wife one morning and I asked her, and I didn't even ask her, I just said to her, I'm going to film with you. And she was like, okay. You know, and so we started following her. But we have an agreement that everyone filming must be ready to film himself. Or somebody had to film you, had to follow you, so that if anything happened, we can connect the story. You know, and so that was how my wife got into it. But when the Ebola itself started, I started doing video diaries. It was not for something like this. I wanted to keep up with what was happening in the country, because I could remember when it was in Kailao and it came over to Kenema, I was one of those people who wrote on WhatsApp that if they allow the Ebola to reach the north, certainly it will come to Freetown. And that's exactly what happens.
So thank you for this, and also thank you for sharing your own family, because I think it also raised this issue that we're always concerned with, that the minute there is an outbreak like that, first of all, other health services, even the few of them that are there, actually start not to be available anymore. And at the same time, it also shows us that, as you also indicate in the film, that there are no health services. And the few that are there are then not available anymore. There are no nurses and doctors, and the few that are available are then pulled into this effort. Joanne, if I can just go to you for a minute. You lived through all this. And with this new outbreak in Congo, you've also drawn attention to the fact it's the community. And you know, all the criticisms around this Ebola outbreak several years ago highlighted again and again, it's about the community, and you have not taken the community seriously. Why is it we don't learn?
The good question. Bonsoir. I just want to say, first of all, you know, thank you so much, Arthur, because I think it's a bit the untold story, and I think I've read everything on Ebola, and I think I've watched a lot of things, and that it's one of the movies that has moved me the most, because it's getting the record straight about the community and how much they've been the hero and the game changer about the Ebola epidemic and all the Ebola epidemic that we are going through. So to answer your question, Ilona, it's first of all, I'm going to answer it like in different parts. The first thing is about the fact that right now there's an Ebola epidemic in North Kivu. It started in August 1st, And there's 952 people who've been infected, and 587 lost their life. It's the second biggest Ebola epidemic in our modern history, and it's the biggest in DRC, number 10. So one of the things that we need to remember is the thing that remains about Ebola. And the thing is, Ebola is awfully brutal. It's brutal. How many diseases that split a mother from their sick child? How many diseases that you cannot pay your respect to your loved ones when they die? How many diseases that you still die alone with spacemen, people wearing spacesuit around you? That's Ebola. So before we think of anything else, I think we need to remind that to ourselves. I think that we need to talk about what is positive today about what's going on in North Kivu, because it's really worthwhile. And it's the fact there was rapid mobilization, and the fact there were early notification, early declaration, and the fact that we have new tools in our toolbox. We have vaccines. 85,000 people almost have been vaccinated in that outbreak. We use it at the peak of the outbreak. We never know how many deaths we have prevented, but 85,000 people, the contact of sick people and the contact of their contacts, and as well frontline worker, not only the doctors and the nurses, but the ambulance driver or the community health person. So these are things that we need to celebrate. We need to celebrate as well that we have therapeutic solution, and we use it as well in people today. And that is great. This is fantastic. The difference from last time is the fact that in DRC, people know about Ebola. This is number 10. So they are taking the leading role, they're running the show, which is great. The other thing, it's in a conflict area. This is what we've been fearing so much, and we were trying to prepare for. And then, right now, what do we need to improve? We have shared some of our concern about what's going on, and the fact that there's still a lot of fear, the fact that there's still people dying in the community, so their death, their cases that we only learn once people have died. So it means they haven't reached out to us to come and to be cared for. The fact as well, there's still people that don't belong what we call to the contact list. And the fact that there's recurrent attacks on the people who are trying to bring a response. Last month, 30 incidents of security, 2 Ebola centers from MSF were burned down, and 2 more over the last 10 days. So what do we need to improve? Yes, we talk about the community, and now the new buzzword, it's about community engagement. But what does it mean? Beyond, saying, we need to talk to people. And what we're trying to say, and I think that Arthur has exemplified so much, is to make sure that as much as the patient and the community, they own the disease. They're running the show. They're coming with their answer. And it's not the foreigner or other people who comes and give them lesson and preach them what to do. And I always say that every epidemic starts in the community and stops in the community. The buying is completely vital. And so the other thing is, we think the lesson that we haven't really enacted is the fact that what it's happening in terms of perception. And then I think for North Kivu, what we need to remind ourselves, and that's what everybody told me when I was there a few days ago, is we don't understand what's going on to a certain extent. Like in the movie, we're confused. We're feared. And they said, we don't understand to see all those white cars driving really fast, coming and picking up body in our house, and then after that, burning down our belonging. So this is still happening. And so they look at Ebola as if it's a business. They said, we've been dying in North Kivu. We went through war. Where were you when we were being massacred? Where were you when we have epidemics of measles, Or when we have epidemics of cholera or malaria, where were you? And I think it's a very valid question. And why are you so worried about that disease and not the other time you were not worried? And this is why that it's hard to build community trust when we haven't answered that properly. And so the basic thing is, again, and then author said it, it's about communication. And then we haven't got the right narrative. And then it's not, to put blame on anyone, it's not about a blame game. But I think we need to just acknowledge that we still haven't got it right yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Can I say something
Yes,
about
please.
the community and the narrative? I strongly believe that even though Sierra Leone and Congo are like far away, and we have different cultures, different attitudes, I also think there are certain things that cut across Black Africa. That is, the ordinary man in Africa only trusts the ordinary man. You understand me? We trust ourselves at our level. And if it goes above our level, there is absolutely no trust. Because if you look at the situation in Congo, the ordinary man is fighting for his life, not trusting the government and government-related institutions, thinking that they are here to push the agenda of the government. You understand me? You have those particular conflicts. That was why, with us, we decided that we have to do it our own way. We have to do it in a way in which people will believe us. And the only way to do that is to ensure that the narrative is one that the people are familiar with. You understand me? What do I mean? From the character, to the kind of message and the way the message is given to the people has to be something that the people are familiar with, the people believe. These are voices that the people had to listen to. So for me, what we did was we had to use the name Hassan. Hassan is a very popular name in Sierra Leone. So we had to deal with this character called Hassan, who tells a story about him being infected, going to the center, being advised by his wife, going to the center, and he came out cured. And was like saying, I trust these guys because it's not like what people were saying. And I played the role of Hassan. But what happened, it was so believable that one day I went to a pharmacy to buy medicine. Vitamins, to buy some vitamins. And when I went into the pharmacy, the pharmacist looked at me and says, you are the guy who was infected with Ebola. I couldn't say no. You understand? Even though I was not infected, I couldn't say no. But then it shows you how the message goes down. You understand me? It's like, I'm sorry about it. What you did was so right, and that is why people are now going to the hospital. We have to look for that message. We have to look for that language that the people will understand and trust and hold on to. I think there is still hope. What you said was correct. People are like, the day we are dying, you're not here. When we die through bullets and other things, you're not here. What are you doing now? So it's about getting people to understand what's the role is. When I heard about MSF being attacked, it was a troubled time for me. But then I also see what's been going on in that place. And I also understand what the situation might be. So it's about reaching out to the people and allowing the people to own everything. And when the ordinary man owns everything, believe it or not, the problem is settled.
Thank you. And that, of course, very much was the message of the young boy when he said, I will take my own life in my hand, basically. And again, a very strong message in terms of survival and various levels as you had, surviving the childbirth, surviving of the death of your father, surviving a disease. And I think that also touched me so much that it wasn't just, as you indicated, the survival from Ebola, but really the survival of a community, a society, individuals charged with crises while Ebola was going on. So actually this message, while Ebola is going on, so many other things are just going on, and life is going on. And I think that's also what, as we discuss certain disease responses, is what we forget, that life continues for many people on many, many different levels. Annie, you've worked in very difficult environments. Can you share with us, what went through your head when you saw this film and how it related to some of the experiences you had? And I think particularly that point that for me also came across so strongly. I mean, we have all these great words about health is a human right and the WHO Constitution and all of that. And for me, just seeing this, the value of each and every life really comes across. And in the abstract discussions, it often doesn't, and one wonders, why don't people get it? Each and every life is valuable. Could you share some of your thoughts with us and your experiences and how you think we can move forward?
Sure.
I bet.
I think this film is a blockbuster. It's just gripping, and it's the second time we've watched it, and I think maybe for me the reason it's so powerful is that for the first time it's a movie about life, and we see all these movies about deaths. It's always about the death toll and the cases and the death count, and we see the living here in the survivors and the new life, in the stories that they tell, and you can really understand it differently from the way that we even talk about disease. And for me, it's like, and for those who know me, my students, my husband, this is always how I work, whatever environment I'm in, whether it is in Congo or Sudan or Kenya or Syria or Somalia. The only way to get things done is if you live and work in the community, and if you build that trust and you go back and back and you are there, and you work alongside the people who are actually getting things done, who are the frontline responders in every single epidemic and every single war. They're the ones who take the burden of response and carry it all the way through, through the point where the internationals come in and override and undermine, and as we saw in that dreadful scene where Mohammed is sacked, and we put the burden of response upon them without really understanding the full measure of what they are suffering from the stigmatization from their own family and community, the risks that they face as medical personnel on the front line, and even the sheer difficulty of trying to care for patients when, as doctors, I'm a pediatrician and Joanna's emergency physician, the first thing you do is to touch your patients. Arthur is a pastor. I mean, how do you fulfill your role as a pastor when you're not allowed to touch people? So I see this played out in pretty much everywhere I have worked as a doctor and on the ground, and you see the tension and the disconnect between the policy level up here, which says we will do this, and the clear differences between perhaps the 2014 epidemic and the current epidemic in Congo is now we have made significant advances, biotechnical advances. So we have the vaccine. It has been rolled out and delivered. We have at least four experimental treatments which people are receiving in Congo. We have a much better diagnostics to diagnose it much faster. We haven't got any better at our media messaging. We've made no advances at all, where in Congo, it starts with, you better wash your hands with soap and water. Oh, bearing in mind that you may not have any soap, you may not have clean water, you may not have any chlorine, you probably don't have any of those things. These are the symptoms: fever, diarrhea, vomiting. Those are the symptoms of practically every disease that you can walk through into the emergency department. They're also the symptoms of malaria and of cholera. I mean, Ebola doesn't actually cause vascular meltdown. It causes a fever and then you see this a lot of diarrhea and vomiting similar to cholera. And yet, so what are patients meant to do, or people meant to do with an information where they're told, watch out for these symptoms? And then what do? Do you go to a hospital where you may be just as likely to get infected? Because hospitals are known as places, as sources where you can catch it. Or do you do what Dartha described, where you make a run for it? You don't, if you're told that Ebola kills, well, why would you present for treatment anyway? Pretty much in the same way that for years and years, WHO would say that polio permanently cripples. So why would you bother presenting if you're told that it permanently cripples you when it doesn't? It permanently cripples and there's no treatment for it. It doesn't permanently cripple you. Most people get over it. There is a lot of supportive treatment that guarantees at least 70 to 80% of people can actually walk again and be completely normal. But people who are told that it kills, that Ebola kills or that polio permanently cripples, won't present because it's stigmatizing and difficult. So, there's a very sort of striking tension between this much better international vigorous response, which has controlled the spread of Ebola to this most difficult area of North Kivu, which is intractable. And we say that because it's been going on for several decades with a very large peacekeeping force, and it has only spread it's been geographically contained to an area of about 400 kilometres, and it hasn't crossed borders to Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, Burundi, any of those places, despite the fact that in Goma alone there are 100,000 border crossings every single day. So it has been dealt with in a very different way that doesn't include all the violations of human rights that are seen in the film, the containments, the quarantines, the isolation, the restricted travel, which really make people furious too. So it's a longer way of answering a complicated question, but we, as doctors, we know that we have to get better at at this disease, because this is not the last epidemic. We cannot have a disease-driven response and ignore the malaria and the cholera and the... Okay, and so this is the last piece. So Congo, I've been working in for the last 4 years. You can sit in Goma and watch the Toyotas drive up and down. It looks like a Toyota convention sometimes. 3 hours north of Goma, Beni, is where the epicenter of the epidemic. 3 hours south of Goma is a very large island with about 300,000 people on it, where the life expectancy is 25 years. So this is a type of environment where we are used to working in, where we think we have to get better at rebuilding a health system and building it up and to address all of this, and not have this top-down focus on a single disease which ignores the realities of life, and the most important realities of life, which is that we have to be able to have the human contact. As Deco described, he couldn't have survived if Margaret hadn't been there to help and support him. Okay.
So, Arthur, you touch on this ambivalence in the film that partly Annie alluded to, that on the one hand, there is these people coming in and taking decisions and not really caring much about what the community thinks. On the other hand, you have this example of the father who says, thank you for coming and thank you for helping save my child. How does that play out? What was your experience in this outbreak?
Well, first of all, the interventions of foreign organizations has its good side. It has the good side and also the negative side of it. And the good side of it is the fact that they were there when they get there, and they contributed a lot to ensuring that the outbreak, came to an end. You understand me? And that's, I've always been saying kudos to MSF for that, because they've always been on the ground, since the war. And now the Ebola, you understand me, they've always been there. But then when you begin to get people coming in who are coming in with their own kind of attitude and do not understand the culture of the people, that's where the problem is. Ebola destroys the entire social fabric, and people are like stressed out. Like you said earlier on, we cannot touch each other. You understand me? We are limited in our movements, and the worst of it for an African, birth and death are the most important time in the life of an African. When he's born, he's given a name, and that name is believed to take him or her to his or her destiny. And when they died, you understand me, especially for Islamic and traditional communities, you understand me, they strongly believe that certain rituals has to be performed. And when those rituals are not performed, they also believe that there are consequences. You understand me? And so when people died, and they are buried in places where their relatives do not know, it increases the tension in their life. You know, I'll tell you that there came a time when people dug up dead bodies just so that they could perform rituals. It happens. You understand me? And so when you look at all that which happens around people, and then you now came in with some kind of attitude, it results badly. And so what I'm trying to say is that when the international community sends people into communities, I think they should be briefed as to the culture and way of life of those people. Now, Mohammed had worked since the start of the outbreak to the end. And he worked 7 days a week without rest, without a day off, without holiday. They will call him, he will go home at 6. They will call him at 12 midnight to pick up somebody and take to some place. He will return and will not rest. Probably they'll just call him, he will be returning, and they might be washing the ambulance, and they'll just call him again. You have to pick up somebody. And so he reaches a point in which he had 2 accidents. And then this organization now came in as the tail end of the Ebola, and they were contracted by government to draw down equipment, you know, and they decided to start with the top guys who they think might become threats to them, not understanding that if you want to do drawdown in places like Sierra Leone, you don't start with the top. You encourage the top. They will help you to do it successfully. And so he went in for Mohammed. And in coming in for Mohammed, he also came with military guys to take the key from him. And so for some of us, it was an insult. That was why I personally went there. And that was why we took up the issue. We took up the issue. We went to the radio, went to TV. Some of us went to the office of the vice president by then, you know, to get them involved in that particular issue. Because international people coming in from outside, they are paid more than locals working. You understand me? So you are paid more than the man who is risking his life. And then you want to bully him on top of that. You understand me? That was what the problem was. So we do appreciate it. We also have the issue of some Sierra Leoneans. That's the breakdown of the medical system, in which corruption and maladministration is in it. You understand me? They will not treat you if a white man is not around. They will not touch you. You saw that in the issue where Mohammed came in with the sick woman. You understand me? So it plays this two-way role, but I think it's something that has to be addressed from where it's coming from. And finally, you have the issue of 117. It was when I came to Geneva, that was when I noticed that 117 is the number for your police. And 117 was introduced in Sierra Leone. The problem was, it was a decision taken here in Geneva. You understand me? And it was introduced in Sierra Leone to use 117 to call for the ambulance when people were sick. But the locals were not informed. And one of the worst things you will do to a Sierra Leonean is to gossip him. And so by calling the police by calling 117 when somebody is sick, it's taken as gossip. And so up till today, there are communities in which families are not talking to each other because they'll say, you call 117, and somebody in my family was taken to the hospital and he died. He never came back. So there are serious disputes in communities. I know of villages in which people from this village cannot go to that village because of that particular issue. People from this family cannot come to this family because of that particular issue. I personally made peace between a chief and half of his village. You understand? A chief and half of his village, because he called for the ambulance when people were sick. And now he became their enemy number one. Nobody was talking to him in the village. You see, so how international interventions are made and implemented on the ground, you understand me, is very, very critical for success and for peace to prevail after everything will have ended.
Thank you. Arthur said that he'd like to hear from some of you how you thought about the film or answer any questions that you might have. Here's a colleague. Please hand the mic there. I'll collect some if that's all right with you.
Thank you very much, Arthur, for showing us that very, very captivating video. Francis from the Zambian mission, I'm based here in Geneva. But one thing that caught my attention is what was sent on the flyer, to the invitation for us to come to this engagement, if I can quote. It says, the epidemic potential of diseases such as Ebola has revealed not only the weaknesses of the national health systems, but also the gaps in the World Health Organization, fragmented and dominated by Western countries' internal security priorities, rather than the comprehensive approach to public health management. That is, I cannot agree more with you than what you said. So now what we would like to hear, we have seen other conditions, such as cholera, for instance. We have 47 countries in the world that are currently affected by cholera, and more than 2 million deaths are recorded every year. That is according to WHO. And similar to Ebola. And what is the global world doing about addressing such concerns or such issues? Because it is more than just responding, waiting for the epidemic to occur, then we mount a response. How are we addressing the preventive aspects of this? Because what we may need is just to address the water, sanitation, and hygiene issues into this developing world and the like. So how do we address that concerns? Maybe I can address this to Anne. Thank you.
I think that's an incredibly important point. Post-World War II, there was when the WHO was formed and the health as a human right was first articulated, and there was a common recognition that building up each country's public health built the global good and protected every country. And we have shifted into this increasing securitization and global health driven by fear, often deliberately, where fear is used as a tool to build the homeland walls higher and to kind of polarize a response, which does everything to protect the North and nothing at all to build up these fragile health systems in the South, and nor to actually generate a much wider protection. After Ebola, WHO was encouraged to develop an emergency department, and it was funded, and that was the sort of consensus post the Ebola epidemic in 2014. And Joanne and I both argued very strongly for a much more robust response, which recognized all of these other issues, that 2 million deaths of cholera, 10 million deaths of TB every year, which is just still flying well under the radar, and yet is a very important biosecurity threat. And the absolute paramount importance of building up healthcare systems and the healthcare workers themselves, who cannot really be expected to continue under these conditions where they are not supported, where they, as I said, take the brunt and the burden of dealing with these diseases and epidemics and wars. They are always the frontline responders, whether you're a medic, a driver, a volunteer, a pastor, and you're facing a lack of support, the attrition of your colleagues through death, disease, targeting, you're not paid sufficiently, and the families of those who die are not left with any kind of pension provided by UN, WHO, which would go along. For example, once, if Mohammed had died as a driver, or you mentioned he has 7 colleagues who all died, all volunteers, and so they leave, of course, 7 families, unprovided for. who may not be able to then keep their house, they might not be able to pay the rent, the property goes to the brother-in-law or the brothers or the paternal side, then widows may be cleansed, raped, children can't afford to go to school anymore, and so you start this vicious cycle downwards. Instead of doing something as obvious as even providing a compensation for the families of those who've died as healthcare workers on the front line, we fire them and sack them and disrespect them, and then we are surprised when they don't engage. So at this level, you know, I think we are working very hard to try and change this polarized attitude, which is sadly politically fueled often, and to recognize the strengths of the locals everywhere who are actually doing the very hard work. But it's a deeply important issue, and thank you for raising it.
Thank you. It is deeply important, but as you also know, Annie, that, I mean, and you work with him, that the WHO does have a Director General now who has prioritized the building of universal health systems, who has put that on the agenda, who's working with African countries to try and move this agenda forward. And at the same time, you know, while we talk about securitization of health, it's very interesting to see that the Western countries are not financing the very mechanism that they themselves have set up, the Global Contingency Fund, in order to respond. And so while the response in the Congo is going on, there has to be constant fundraising, even to do the very basics. And as Dr. Tedros said in his press conference, I think 2 days ago, he said he accepted the criticism of, you know, one is still not working sufficiently with the community, but also that is in turn a much more expensive response for which he is not getting the financial support. Because as you rightly said, Arthur, these people should be paid properly. They should not be doing that just, you know, because they belong to the community. They should be respected. And to some extent, that respect also comes with being able to support your family because you do this kind of work. So I think we are in a situation where the global community, whatever that is, but definitely WHO is much more conscious of having to go into building health systems, but that the financing of that approach is one that is incredibly difficult to achieve. And as you know, this agenda now goes to the UN General Assembly. There's already, you know, a whole group of countries that are actually opposed to pushing an agenda forward where we help countries like the fragile states to really build such systems. So I think we're in a very complex situation where actually the realization is there, the political support and the money is not following. And that will be very important discussions, both, you know, in the WHO at the World Health Assembly, but even more so in the other bodies, be it the G20 or be it the UN General Assembly. And the development organizations, of course, need to totally reorient the way they support countries at country level to build institutions rather than, as you rightly said, Annie, to fight disease after disease. Joanne, you wanted to add something here.
Yeah, just quickly, and thank you for the question about cholera. I think that, you know, just to answer simply at least one aspect of this about, you know, how to prevent that, it would be about accepting to declare cholera when it happens. And we know it's a blind spot. In so many countries, we call it acute watery diarrhea, and it's still not called, you know, cholera. So I think we need, if you want to fix something, you need to call it its name. That's one thing. So I think the other thing that we know, I'm not sure about the money issue as much. You know, there's some people in North Kivu who say there's too much money. There's too much of those cars, you know, running around. There's too much of those foreigners coming. There is, you know, pay us properly and we'll fix the thing. So I think that it's just not, you know, as black and white as one may want to portray it. But I think that we cannot, I would say, lie to ourselves on the fact that states, and I think that 2014-2015 epidemic was really clear and proved that states don't have friends, they have interests. So if it, fits their interests, they're going to come and help. And if it doesn't, it doesn't fit their political agenda, they won't. So it's just, I think that we have to be cognizant about those kind of dynamic, and then we need to make sure that we don't as well give a blank check for more, without having some right result. I think today, and just to come back to Nord Kivu, I think that unless we have some real, I would say, change of how we engage in the community, but real, I would say, way of doing that will change, I don't think we should fund more, to a certain extent. It just, there's something happening right now, like people are digging out the body of their loved ones because they're upset. How are we doing? We need to change. The people who are offering now an answer, we need to change. If we don't get it, what are we going to get in terms of message?
Arthur, hearing this, what goes through your head?
Well, I personally think that the issue of the health infrastructure in Africa, for example, in where I come from, in Sierra Leone, I think that we do not only need assistance in building those structures, but I also think that the international communities and aid organizations should try to implement benchmarks for governments, you understand me, and practices within the health sector. Because some of the things that are happening, looking at the issue of even cholera itself, those can be prevented by practicing basic hygiene, you understand me, within communities. But we easily go back to our old ways. I'll tell you something for free. If you go now to Sierra Leone, all of this, the standards we are introduced during the Ebola, they've already suddenly gone back, and we've already gone back to our old ways. You understand me? Quickly, like that. And this should not happen. It's happening because there are a lot of things. It's educational. You understand me? It's within the educational sector. It's also happening because the governments are failing to talk about the things they needed to talk about to help the everyday life of individuals. It's a complex situation. I sometimes sympathize with people like you, working in all of these things, trying to get money, trying to help, trying to see how we could ensure that all of these things work. But it's about going back to the communities and understanding how and why things happening. Once you're able to get that understanding, and it's also about being sincere to help, because what you were saying about that, states don't have friends. You understand me? They have interest. They have interest. If it had not been for MSF, I've always been saying it, to intervene in Kailan, it would have been something else in Sierra Leone. You understand me? Some of the people saying that we are friends of Sierra Leone, when the outbreak happened, they were not there to even help us get one ambulance. The ambulance that we have, the first set of ambulance that came to Sierra Leone, were bought partially by the United States and the government of Sierra Leone. They were bought from Saudi Arabia. You understand me? And it's, all of these things, for me, it's just funny. So it's about us helping ourselves the best way we can, to have a better life.
One more question? Yes, here, the lady.
What is first of all, it's a great movie. It's so real. It's grounded, it's real, it's reality. So I have to think.
Can you introduce yourself?
Layla Smith, biologist.
Yeah, okay.
I just thought the movie was really very touching because it was real and it was grounded and it was the real life that you lived. My question is about what is done today to prevent in your area from the bottoms up the Ebola outbreak, another Ebola outbreak.
Can I just collect one or two more to get some more voices here? There's a blonde lady here.
Thanks. My question is to Arthur. Thank you so much. I think that what I really appreciated about the film was the personal faces, and I appreciated that you you didn't just focus on nurses and doctors, but I found the ambulance driver to be, you know, sort of an unsung hero. I think, at least for most of us who may not have been involved. And I was wondering, I know that you were filming for 8 months, and I'm sure that there were lots of other individuals and characters, as you put that, that you were able to interact with. Was there anyone else who really touched you that, from a community perspective, you know, played an important role or has an important role as it relates to how the community responds to an outbreak that you weren't able to put into the film?
Thank you. I can't take any more. We have to end at 9. I'll give Andrew the last word. Arthur, sorry.
Can I just say something while you're thinking?
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, just to raise, what we didn't discuss was, you know, your own wife, your own child. Women and children are so vulnerable to this, and we see that. You know, she's a woman, she's exposed, because she has to go to a health clinic, you know, for antenatal care. She's got a complicated pregnancy, which means she needs more, you know, she should have more investigations, and she was nearly, you know, she was about to have a cesarean section, which of course would have exposed her and the child. And in today's Ebola epidemic, 57% of the women, of the cases are women. Wow. You know, another 30% are under 18. You know, there are 70 healthcare workers infected out of the 900 and plus, a third of which have died. So she's a nurse, and she's a woman, and she's a mother, and she fits all those categories. I mean, that's...
Sure.
I just want to say, give my respect to your wife.
In terms of what is happening in the country now to prevent this, I cannot tell you, because very little or nothing is happening. I was one of those people shouting at the School of Medicine and Allied Health Science in Sierra Leone to have started doing something with Ebola when the outbreak started. You understand me? But there is nothing being done. And I think our the education of the medical sector has to be looked into, the kind of subject matter that people go in for. Most of them, 90% want to become surgeons. You understand me? Nobody wants to do the other aspect. That is one problem. Most recently, the Ebola Survivors Union, they sued the government at the ECOWAS Court of Human Rights. So they have a case there because the government has neglected them. But I'll tell you what we are doing. As an organization, we own TV, the Freetown Media Center. We are working on a database. We call it We Survive. Emory University in the United States has agreed to host that database for us, but we're still working on it because we're still looking for funds to complete it. So what we're trying to do is to interview Ebola-infected persons. We've already done something like 100 hours of interviews. So we want to interview as much as we can and to get their understanding as to how they were infected, how they went through the entire treatment center, and what life is like for now for them. And what I'll tell you about them is that every one of them that I've interviewed so far have been complaining of pain. And there are all the serious side effects. People are going blind. I'll tell you, I met several that have gone blind. Some are gone deaf. I met with 2 men who spoke about impotency. You understand me? So there are different side effects for most of them. And the worst thing is that they are being stigmatized, not by their communities, but by the health center, the health system. Because when they go to hospital where they should have treatment, and that's what government told them to do, to get free treatment, they put them on different areas and tell people, no, don't sit by him. You understand me? He was Ebola infected, and it's so bad. It's so bad. And in terms of, for your question, there is somebody that I would have loved to make it to this film, but she wasn't able to make it, and that is a matron in Kenema, matron Josephine Sello. Josephine Sello, I would say, is the heroine of the Ebola outbreak in Kenema. You understand me? Her work in the Kenema hospital and the community itself was exceptional. If you go to Kenema and you ask any individual on the streets, who would you recommend, apart from Dr. Khan was popularly known as the lead doctor, but the actual individual who was there, you understand me, making sure that things change for people who were infected and making sure that nurses who were infected, have the courage to come to the center and taking information out of people was Nurse Josephine Sello. But what happened to her was that at the end of the day, well, they did some recognition in which it was just political. Most of these people were not recognized, you understand? But she is now working at the only psychiatric home we have in Sierra Leone. And finally, I want, if you are working in any organization that is working on health issues, I think ensuring that's the discussion on how to help African countries have a sustainable health system is very, very important for me. And also how to ensure that these outbreaks in Africa, come to an end is also very, very important for me. And for that, I want to say thank you to the festival because they've enabled me to have a French subtitle of this film. And it's been our dream to take this film to Congo. And I will be talking to you about that so that we're able to get this film to Congo. We want to ensure that we get the film to Congo, but also to ensure that French West Africa, Guinea and Senegal and Mali, Togo, they're all able to see the film and join in the discussion. Thank you very much.
So since Arthur actually took my last question from me, I was going to ask him, are you going to show this film in Congo? So now we know, yes, he will. I'd say a very, very special thanks to him because not only for his film, but for the extraordinary things he also shared with us now on the panel. I'd like to say thank you to Joanne and Annie for joining us and contributing, and particularly to you for showing this interest. And tell everyone this is the film they need to see. And wherever you can, support the efforts in the way of building health systems along the lines that Arthur has outlined to us. Thank you again, Arthur, and thank you, everyone.